Number one way to increase your sales is spend more time in front of the right customer. Now you can get better at selling. That's certainly going to help as well. That's probably the next biggest lever is your ability to sell and understand the sales process and the customer journey there to get to a close. But if you're spending twice the time, you're going to have twice the results.
Got questions, we bring the facts. From proven pros who walk the tracks. Business life, no smoke, just flames. Ask the experts, David Williams brings the game.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ask the Experts, where we come to you every single week with leaders and experts in the industry to bring you knowledge and value to help you continue to grow and break records in your own business. Today's guest is Boyd Lichtenberg, and he's the VP of Sales and Strategic Planning at Giveaway Pad, the company that's flipping lead generation on its head by targeting the 99% who are not actively shopping and turning them into permission-based, relationship-ready conversations. Boyd has spent a decade building revenue engines in fintech, logistics, SaaS, and home services, supporting more than 400 businesses with a people-first nurturing campaign approach and custom automation. Fluent in Spanish, which, sorry, I can't hang with you on that one today, and a former founder himself. He's known for one guiding principle. If your lead gen isn't human-centered, it's just noise. I build signal, and we're going to get more into that. Today, we're going to unpack why traditional leads don't work like they used to, how Giveaway Pad solves the trust gap with locally relevant giveaways, and why lead quality, not quantity, is the real growth lever for time-starved agency owners. So, Boyd, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, doing great. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thrilled to have you. And it's been great getting to know you over the past couple of months and, you know, seeing what you guys are doing to revolutionize the space and just the level of care that you bring. I'd love to dive into kind of pre-insurance world and, you know, a little bit of your background. I think everybody ends up where they're at for a reason. And if you start to look at the expertise that you bring to the table, I'd love to know just some of the early journey of kind of how you got your start, what your early days in business and your career look like, and then ultimately how you landed at Giveaway Pad, if you don't mind giving just a high level overview for those of you, those in the audience who don't know you yet.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I've always had just an interest in growth. And I think if I could sum up my whole any job I've had, where I've ever found interest or passion, it all comes back to that, helping people achieve more than they thought they could. And it's not always something that's super easy or apparent. You know, a lot of times it is just hard work. But I started out in, financial economics was what I studied in school. And, you know, if you can read the numbers, then you know what to do next. They kind of tell a story. And I quickly realized that value is created in sales. And I went to work with a number of companies in the sales arena. Some were business to business, some were business to consumer. But I always looked for, you know, what are the industry within an industry? What's the agency or what's the which company is at the top of the the top of the hill, and who do I want to learn from? I want to go to the best company and learn from the best team. So that's where I kind of hopped around from, within maybe a half a dozen or a dozen sales jobs. And eventually, you know, you get to this point after managing teams and working with different sales processes, products, and services, things start to become the same. And you learn certain patterns. And I was recruited by a best friend of mine from childhood, Ryan Egan. He's the founder of Giveaway Pad. And he's like, hey, man, let's go make some magic over here in digital marketing. And he's kind of a ninja in the space. And so he taught me everything I know at the time on, digital marketing and helping small businesses, really where it started. So that's where 10 years ago I started working with him roughly. And we worked with 500 or 600 businesses, really automating whatever they wanted, custom solutions. We were in-house with a company called Infusionsoft, and then went to be on their implementation team remotely. And eventually we said, we want to automate something that makes people money. Let's do lead generation. And we worked in a dozen industries there before we realized, hey, if you're good at leads and generating the quality and the quantity and helping people get the results, you got to pick an industry that answers the phone. So we've been in insurance ever since now, and worked with hundreds of agencies, done thousands of giveaways. We're still pretty small. There's only about 5 of us here, so we partner with about 5 agencies per state. But it really is about taking the sales process and looking at why somebody buys and why they stay. And that's kind of how I got to this point. Love the idea of growing, and whether that's helping a sales producer become better or restructuring a company or business a little differently to get more out of our goals.
I love that. That's incredible, and it's a really cool full circle moment. I'm sure somebody you grew up with, and now you guys are out there like 2 cowboys riding into the sunset,
Oh,
getting
it's the
stuff done. It's
best.
awesome.
We don't work a day of the week. Yeah.
Man, that's beautiful. And one of the things I'm curious about is like what kind of breakdowns or breaks did you start to observe early on in the traditional lead gen model? Like when did you guys, or even you, start to turn your head and go like, I see cracks in this traditional lead generation model, that made you guys maybe think a little bit differently about that?
Yeah, good question. I think we started out like a lot of digital marketers, using different lead magnets and hooks to get people's attention. And so really crafting those carefully and understanding the customer first has always been a focus. What are they looking for? What's important to them? A lot of people think sales is about being good at closing somebody and getting them to buy what you want and get them to do what you want. And there's something to be said about that. But at the end of the day, it's really, how could we help to solve a problem? So we had to understand what that was. And then the more you dive down that rabbit hole, you start to learn not everybody's the same shopper. We buy differently. And so that's kind of where this divide, when we came to insurance, we saw, hundreds of agencies generating leads, all focused on the 99% that are always shopping, the rate hunters. And we're like, well, if I was an agency owner, we're the guys that are, they just buy once.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a different perspective in that regard. That in other industries, you might look at that like a fresh pitch or a switchover pitch. All right, there's different sales in that regard, right? You're talking to somebody about the differences that you provide versus what they currently have, or you're selling someone that's never bought your product or service before. So in insurance, we don't do a lot of the people that aren't shopping. So that was a bit of a change for a lot of our newer customers.
Yeah, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into kind of the giveaway pad framework in just a moment here. I want to lay a foundation with you. And one of the other things that I read is that you say trust is the new currency. Curious what you think about how consumer skepticism, with just the inundation and all the noise and all the marketing that's going on, how that skepticism has kind of changed the rules for insurance marketing in 2025, with, again, like the core principle being trust is the new currency.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think trust has always been the currency, but it's gotten a lot more. What are those indicators that tell me I can trust a company or a person? And if you look back over the last few decades, in insurance and in other industries, the amount of touch points that you need to convert someone to a sale has changed. Back in the day, I used to hear, well, you got to go through 7 no's, right? There's only 7 objections. And then in the digital marketing space, a lot of people talk about, well, 15 touches or 15 emails. And nowadays in insurance, you hear people talk about, well, we make 30 calls in the first 30 days, and being a lot more aggressive. So, if I were to pull out some trends in insurance specifically, the quality of leads over the last decade or so has really tanked across the board in a lot of respects. And some of that might be competition, but you also have some other factors. When you run ads, the ad algorithms are targeting what they think you want, which might be a lower cost per lead or lots of people to talk to. But the types of people that the algorithm converts aren't necessarily a good fit for insurance. So that goes back to that trust factor, right? If you're advertising to a shoppers, it's not so much about trust as it is about price.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we really focused on. Was we're going to target a market that doesn't have shopping on the mind at all. And then the key is, now that I'm in front of them, I want to make dang clear that the only thing we care about is them, whether they buy from me or not. And once people have that realization, I mean, and I'm sure a lot of, or most everybody that's listening can probably agree, people really buy at the speed of trust. And, and those that buy on price only, it's easy in and easy out. So there,
Mhm.
it kind of depends on what you want to focus on it within your agency.
I love that. Yeah, and it's like getting away from the commoditization of the industry and going after that group of people who are not shopping makes so much sense. And I love just the simplicity of that concept, right? It's like you step back and you go like, how many people are in America, right? Over 300 million people. How many people are eligible for insurance? But there's just this slice that is shopping all the time and they're price sensitive, and that's going to be the baseline of their conversation. But you guys are like, take a look over here at all these people. And if you can establish something built on trust and a relationship and solving something more than just a price, better retention, better customers. So can you walk us through the kind of the giveaway pad framework? I'd be curious what maybe the first like 90-day giveaway cycle looks like. I was reading a little bit about prizes and promotions and opt-ins and producer follow-up. And I wondered if you could just help people understand what this framework looks like and why it works in the industry.
Yeah, and I'll start by mentioning one other thing on that
Yeah.
trust side. Part of why this works so well is because we're talking to people that do value an agent. And a lot of agencies have kind of gone the way, if they've just kind of followed the trend of the leads, where the quality gets low. I got to work harder and faster, make 200, 300 calls a day, and see what sticks. But the types of people that we're focusing on here, they're not they might value coming in if they need to, right? Or they might say, well, at least I know I can call my guy and he's going to be there to help me figure out my claim or challenge that comes up. So there's a definite increase in valuing who they're with. Now, to earn that trust, it is a little bit of a learning curve for the agency. So we have a ton of support in our program to help with that. But to give you a high level of how does a giveaway even work, what does that mean, right?
Mhm.
Giveaways have been around forever. There's lots of ways to do them, and some may work. We really kind of feel like we don't really have any competitors in our space. When you think of a giveaway, you might think, well, if you're giving away something for free, we do one prize every 3 months. Wouldn't that just make the leads terrible? Yeah. It makes it actually worse than internet leads, right? And so we fix that in two ways. One, we're really good at ads. We're very careful about who we show it to. Again, we're not focusing on that 1% shoppers. We want to talk to the 99% that are not shopping and that set it and forget it crowd. And then if I'm showing it to people that have a high need for insurance, maybe a homeowner with multiple vehicles or a boat, that's a much better use of time rather than four households with one car each. It's
Mhm.
that's the big thing here is the average call is going to be worth more. But we show that ad out there on Facebook and Instagram, and they're like, "Oh, hey, that looks cool, but what's the catch?" That's where mine goes, right? And this part is kind of hard for a lot of people to wrap their head around initially, right? Like, would people really opt into this? But the reality is, when you're showing it to a lot of the right people, you're going to get the ones that do think through it and go, "Oh, this makes sense." We give them a pop up to make it really clear. You get a chance to quote, I get a chance to win. It's a trade. Oh, well, that's fine. I haven't looked at my insurance in a while anyway. It's probably time. So we
Mhm.
get people all the time that are surprised. Like I still remember had a customer last year call us back up and say, "Hey, just got off the phone with a lady that she had a $5 million home and a bunch of cars, which is a fairly large quote for most, and never thought she would have entered a $200 giveaway, but looks like we're going to win her business." So a little counterintuitive, but they click on that, they opt in. And then the second part, and even if we overcome and the quality side, right, and you have a bunch of standard and preferred, but you say the wrong thing, that doesn't work either. So we also teach you that conversion process. You call them up, say, "Hey, calling about the giveaway from such and such agency. You know, uh, how you doing today?" And they're excited, they remember, and you just point out, calling to confirm your info. But hey, tell me, I got your info down. We can get you the prize if you win. But if you do win, who would you take with you, to the football game or to the theme park? Oh, cool. How many kids do you have? You get a chance to build that rapport and relate to them a little bit. That's where the connection happens. So that's the magic, is really showing them like, oh, hey, found something that you're interested in. We have fun giving these back to the community every once in a while. And tell me about your family. Well, hey, you got an awesome family. I think you'll have a blast if you win. Can we do you a quick favor? We can get you some more entries for a quick quote on your insurance. So they're like, oh, well, yeah, and happy to go through that. And they want to stay on the line. But first and foremost, even if they don't want to get a quote, they're like, hey, these guys care more about me than the sale. I chose not to quote today, but I might actually call them back when I figure out what I'm paying. So that's our script. That's our process. Our software helps to make things more efficient. We get about a 3 times higher answer rate and a very high quote rate because it does work really well. We have lots of training to help. But that's in a nutshell. We're just doing one prize every 3 months.
Cool. I love that, man. And this is like probably a question you get 100 times a week, but how do you guys ensure that the giveaways don't become like gimmicks that attract like freebie hunters, and a bunch of like people that just like producers
Yeah.
are like, yeah, they all just want the handout. They're not even willing to talk.
Yeah, good point. I'll mention 2 things on that. One, you're still going to get them. But when you're following the script and process that we teach, it'll be a very small percentage. You'll get a lot of people to say yes. The real key is just being upfront with people, being open and honest, and showing them. That's kind of like our funnel does that from the beginning, right? You get a chance to quote, we get a chance to win. Yeah, I'll opt into that, and because they are aware of that up front, it's a much easier conversation. They want to be there. They understand. And then when you jump on, building that rapport, oh man, they're like, I can vibe with Andy all day. Like, this is easy. I would trust him to tell me what I should have on my home and autos. What do you recommend, right? So it's that kind of a mental shift that they're having on the call.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And like, just to get even like more granular with it, do you guys see a trend where like certain prize categories attract more people?
Yeah, no, we have maybe a dozen categories we use. We'll give you guys some examples. Could be a local event or a piece of technology. And, the prize itself isn't going to necessarily be a game changer. There's lots of prizes that will do really well. It really comes down to who we show it to and then what we say. And so, the prize, a lot of them are, simple things like a zoo membership or, like I said, maybe a local comedy event. So if it's popular with the ideal customer, then it's going to be a successful giveaway.
Absolutely. No, that's really cool. And when you guys also look at the metrics of this, right? Because a lot of people would still argue the whole, well, let's just buy thousands of leads and play the volume game, right? But shifting to this model, like what types of metrics typically will convince an agency to maybe slow the dial type game down a bit and get more into the quality game? Is it a contact rate where more people are picking up the phone off something like this? Is it that there's a higher quote rate? Is it that there's a higher close rate? Because there has to be something there, right? That's metrically an advantage, because instead of volume, we're going for maybe a lower volume, but a higher quality. Where do those qualities exist within the actual like metrics or the pipeline?
Yeah,
That makes sense.
absolutely. No, it's there's a number of key conversion metrics that if you can improve those, you don't need some of the solutions out there. And I'll first say there's a time and a place for every lead source. Internet leads, though, I frequently hear, I talk with around 40 agencies a week. Out of 100 leads, we quote 5 and close 1. I'll hear really common out there as well. Out of 100 leads we might buy, maybe we talk to 5 to 20%. So these are some of the things we looked at where we're like, hey, what are we doing with the other 80 leads that we bought that nobody's talking to? And so what we found is when we dug in, because we're talking to a different market. You don't need that high volume of follow-up and, ultra, that extreme follow-up process of calls to get somebody on the line. And those things, I think power dialers like Ricochet, are going to have less of a dramatic effect on a program like ours, because we get, instead of, I don't know, 10 plus calls to get 5 to 20% to answer for typical leads, we're getting, 50 to 60% to answer and up to 3 calls per lead, 3 double dials. So it's you don't need to have some of those solutions or burn through the volume of leads right there. That's almost like hiring another producer or doubling. If you're talking to more people, I don't need to go through so many voicemails to get somebody on the line and quote. Our quote rate, is also really focused on the same thing. Instead of that 5 out of 100 or 1 out of 20, we teach our agencies to quote about 1 out of every 3 leads we send them, 20 to 35%. And so it's really about, making sure those improve. And if I'm getting a lot more to answer and a lot more to quote, even if I'll say this carefully, even if my close rate is lower, a lot of your producers still have a chance to make it if they're good at these other things that we teach and work with them on.
Yeah, no, I'm totally read between the lines on that for sure. And that makes total sense. What kind of like mindset shifts do you typically see that producers need to make? And how do you help producers work through that mindset shift when, they've been in that kind of high volume grind mode and now you're transitioning them? I'm sure for some of them, it's a little bit harder than others to like not come across in the same style or pace that you'd have to use in like a transactional, like traditional lead call. So
Yeah.
what kind of mindset shift must producers adopt to excel with these like permission-based leads?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think, and this goes back to what I believe and what I'm passionate about, which is we're always growing. I have a lot more to learn. I haven't figured everything out either. But there's, when agents come in, if they have done worked leads in the same capacity for so long, there can be some habits, and we tend to think things happen in a certain way. That's the only way it works. So a lot of people, a lot of producers are used to being very transactional. Got to save them money or they're not going anywhere. And that is always going to help, right? If I'm saving somebody $500 versus $10, it's a very compelling reason to switch the more you're saving. But if, and we've all heard this before, people buy because of who they're talking to. And when they can tell the person is genuine and they're there to try and help them, then that trust factor comes to play, and they're like, hey, you tell me what I need to get. So I would say that we have a number of things in our training. We've got video training. We meet with our agents every day live on Zoom if they want to role play, give their producers feedback. And then we have private coaching every week where we meet with the agency owner to actually watch your metrics and see what things we need to change and how, so they can work with their teams to knock it out of the park. But the big mindset shift is going to be, we're going away from the transactional. We're going to have to put a little bit of work in to go back to building that trust and connection. And I'd say what they walk away with is their overall sales game levels up, not just on our leads, but across their other lead sources too. Where they're learning a little bit of a skill there to be a little more personable and to listen a little more and focus on that connection, so much so that, they can carry that over to any other area that they're, any other customer they're talking to.
That's beautiful. And I also know there's a technical approach to this as well that you had, filled me a little bit in on. I'd love to dive into that end as well, because you've got a producer, they've got a certain skill set, they've got a, in a mindset they've got to really take in and be able to duplicate call and call and call. And that's one piece of it, right? It's the human being doing the work, talking to the customer. But then I got to get a hold of people. You've got contact rates. You've got different ways and mediums to reach out to people. And I've always found it's a 3-legged game, right? You've got your underlying lead or prospects, you've got your producer, but then you've got the technology and the methodology that connects them. And if you don't get that connection, it's not going anywhere anyway. And a couple of things I wanted to touch on. You had mentioned a bit on your brief to me about voicemail detection and requeue system. if that's ringing a bell. And I'd love to understand what is that, and can you just give like a beginner's course on what's the advantage to voicemail detection and requeue system, and maybe like speaking to those who don't even know what those two phrases mean.
Yeah. It's really pretty simple. In the sales cycle, you've got your prospecting, where you go meet your customers where they're at. That's what the ads are doing in our case, rather than going and knock on someone's door or meeting them at the grocery store where they're picking out their vegetables. And then you got to qualify, make sure you're talking to the right person, and present. So what we see is that a lot of what we're doing with the technology, you can do on your own. But we're all human, and the technology certainly helps to make sure we get certain results really consistently. So that's a big thing. Once you figure out the learning curve of what we teach, this becomes very consistent. So you mentioned requeue, and controlling that call cadence to make sure you're getting the most out of the leads. And I want to make sure I phrase this in a simple way here, but really, we just saw that, again, because it's a different segment of the market, if we space our calls out the right way, we get a lot more to answer. So there is an element of diligence. We always say people that succeed on this are enthusiastic. They stick to our 60-second script. They build rapport for 2 minutes, not a minute 30 seconds, and they make all 3 calls per lead, 3 double dials. Our system tells you when to make those double dials. So it's very low volume, but we do need you to make all 3 to get those results. And the agencies that audit themselves and they really stick to that, they do really well. So to give you an idea, of what type of bandwidth or commitment you'd need, if you're used to 100 to 150 calls a day as a producer, on ours would be about 50 to 70. So first glance, it's like, well, I don't need to make many calls. 70 calls on our leads is a very full day. We're talking, 6 to 8 hours of calling, just because more answer and quote. And part of that, getting them to answer, our system, it's a drag and drop system. You call them, drag them to the outcome. But once you call them, maybe you leave a voicemail, the system puts them back on the queue at the right time for the second call attempt a couple days later. And so we're just calling them every few days, but
double dials, right?
Double dial every few days. Yeah, that's our secret sauce. But by doing that, you get a lot of people answer. And again, I can hear the skepticism, but it's just you don't really need to bug people when it's something they're interested in. That intrigue of the prize is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And so they're interested, and then you show them that like you care more about them than the sale. And you don't need to make as many calls now, right? 3 calls are 50 to 60% are answering, means a lot less voicemail time.
100%. And one of the other questions I had was outside of the phone call, right? And you're getting a voicemail. Number one, are there other nurturing sequences that you guys integrate or you recommend in terms of like texts, emails, maybe ringless voicemail?
That's right.
And then, how do you do that in a way in which you're not, turning this into spam and people aren't starting to feel like, oh, I signed up for something that's spammy, but you're still giving them that magical personal experience. So just curious, do you recommend those other methods of outreach? And if so, ideally, what does that look like?
Absolutely. These custom automation campaigns is what we did hundreds of before even lead generation. And so what we found is, again, because we've kind of created the perfect storm here, you really don't need to bug people. So that's the key to our process. Is our nurture campaign was more of a retention tool to help people save time. But it works so well now. We just roll it out with just about every agency. We just send them a few emails, a few text messages, and a few ringless voicemails. About 3 of each.
Do you
Very
find the
low
ringless
touches.
voicemail still work, Boyd?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
When you do them right. Now, there's plenty of companies, I'd say a much longer list of people that don't use them the right way. But the technology is awesome. If you haven't heard of it before, it looks like a missed call. But then when you go and it maybe didn't ring very long. But then when you go check your voicemail, it's pretty simple. We're reaching out from this agency, calling about the giveaway. Give us a call back. And we do. We get a good number of people calling in. We send that out if a lead slips through the cracks and your producers haven't called them. Let's nurture them to call in. Or if you guys were on top of your 3 calls That last 40%, 50% that never answered, let's get a few more to call in. So, we get calls every day. It's very different than a live transfer, but they're going to call in. Hey, you guys left me a voicemail about the giveaway. Yeah, we get a lot of bots and businesses trying to sneak in. We just wanted to make sure you're a real person. You're a real person, right? Hey, well, cool. I got you marked down. But hey, tell me, if you win, who'd you guys take with you? Right. So same script. And
And
but
I can hear you put
yeah.
it on, right? Like I can literally hear you put on that tonality, that approach, and it was identical to the last time. So you've got, you've got a lot of training in, but I know you're also working with and encouraging the training to happen within the agencies that you work with. And one of the things you mentioned was the high quote method. Can you just kind of break down what that is in the training process, and how quickly it can kind of be learned by a new hire?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's cool is it's very simple. Here's the problem. It's very specific. And so it's literally, I've mentioned a couple key points of it here already, but really the high quote method is our training to teach you how to quote more out of your leads. I'll give you an example. We have some agencies that are, closing close to or higher than that 100,000 in premium mark in a few hundred leads, less than 500 leads. So it's something that can be very efficient. But basically what we're doing, it's a combination of our whole program, right? Talking to people that are interested, we're going to get more to answer. Saying the right thing to the right people gets more of them to convert. So that script that we teach you, that's what is going to get those conversions to come in. More people are going to quote. When you're doing it right, a little more than half the ones you talk to are open to a quote and will quote with you right there on the phone. And so it really comes down to these simple things again. Have fun with it. Be friendly. Stick to that script. Confirm their information. Build some rapport. And of course, offer them some extra entries for a quote. But that's the high quote method. And there's some phrases, right, that if we say wrong, and this goes back to being specific, and it can be kind of frustrating if you're not listening carefully. But that's why we've got all that coaching in place to listen and practice with you. One sentence, though, you can see a shift of 5 to 10% increase in your quote rate same day, right? It's just got to say the right things for at the right time, and then people understand, right? It goes back to that clarity and trust. They're happy to quote.
100%. And I'm sure that you've, dealt with all sorts of situations. Some agencies probably already are believers in this and they come in and use this approach and they're like all on board. I'm sure you've also worked with some that maybe were a lot more skeptical, but they still gave it a shot. I'd be really curious if you could, regardless of kind of how they came into the program, maybe break down like the most inspiring client turnaround story that you've been involved in with Giveaway Pad, just to lay out like a real world example of somebody who made this transition.
Yeah, that's such a good question. Well, and those are the things that get us excited. And the cool part is there's just so many of them because it is different. We know that. We know that there's almost everybody does it kind of the opposite way. So, I think people that do well on this, they've got a couple producers that are focused mainly on selling. So they have the time to make calls. If your agency can do 6 to 8 hours of calling a day across all your producers total, that's kind of the minimum success, where it becomes easy to succeed. You can certainly do it with less than that, but with less people, I should say, than two. But it becomes more challenging. So having the right setup to begin with, if you've got experience calling, that's going to help tremendously. These leads work great if you call them and follow the process. They're terrible if you don't talk to them. But these things come into play. That a good story for this would be, let's see, there's an agency we had that came in and they were with us for about 6 months. So a couple giveaways and big team, 15 producers, and they broke it up and gamified it. So they had a couple teams that were competing against each other. And at the end of 6 months, they told us, well, hey, these seem to be some of our best leads, but we need to cancel, which I would say is a shock, but we hear that a lot. This is working really well. It's not you guys. I need to reframe things with my producers.
Hmm.
And so they paused and just said, hey, I need to figure out my expectations with my team. And they came back a few months later and had hired a sales manager to help with this. Of course, with a larger team, it's helpful to have a few sales managers when you're running that many producers. And so they came back and had hired a sales manager just for this. And of course, you reset expectations with their producers and quickly became one of our top producing agencies. It always goes back to that process. I see other one-man shows that come in, and this is a lot. We're like, hey, we really want you to not have any other leads if you're going to do this on your own, just to make sure you don't go at the end, oh, that was awesome, but I need a vacation. We had another one that said, hey, this was really helpful, but what I realized is you really do have to be ready to hire. It was so easy to add somebody, my second giveaway, get them up and trained right away. You guys trained them before they made calls. Then you have live training right away. So, it can be, people come in with this expectation, is this going to work? And then they quickly go, oh my gosh, this is a flood of quotes and they're good quotes. Let me go back and make sure that I'm doing things exactly right and take it a little more serious. And that's when things start to click.
So if somebody goes all in on this, they could have, let's say, one producer spending 75 to 90% of their day focused on this, quoting from this, and making this a big part of their day, as opposed to like a 10% sliver of their day. Like your recommendation would be saturate your person with this, get their head in this space, get them in the flow, and get them in here as often as possible, and just get the right volume so that they can spend a majority of their day building the book from this method. Does that sound like what you guys would typically recommend, or is it kind of up to the agent? Like, oh, I only have an hour free for this person per day. Let's give them an extra hour of work. Like what different levels do you guys work out? What do you recommend?
Yeah, definitely have some recommendations there. You want to have enough time into this to sink your teeth in and learn the process and become good at it. If you really figure this out, it can become one of the last lead sources you'll need, right? If the quality is really consistent because you're creating your own demand, I just need to make sure I stay with the process that works. So I always say, if you audit in week 52, like you did in week 10, 30 minutes a week, check on your team, make sure we're sticking to the process, you'll stay with us for years to come. But those would be the main factors there. Are we sticking to that process? I think I don't know that I answered your question there. Was that?
No, it definitely answers the question. I think what I'm trying to wrap my head around is sort of like, if you see literally agencies that are like, hey, we started the program with 2 sales producers, and like we're so inundated that we've added like a third, and still like a majority of their team is like spending most of their day on this, or is there a limitation to it? Like, I'm curious about the scalability. Can somebody literally go, I want 75+% of my marketing budget to be giveaways? Are there agencies making it that big a part of their business, or is this typically a supplement that's added on top of leads, billboards, direct mail, and all these other categories?
We do tend to see this become a heavy hitter, especially if they really sat down and figured out how to nail the process. Then they start turning things down or off and ramping this up to become maybe 90% of what they're doing, 80% of what they're doing. I wouldn't say that's uncommon. It's never a bad idea to have eggs in more than one basket, especially for those larger teams out there. But I mean, what an agency owner goes through is, I'm going to ramp up what works. If my ROI is killer over here, I'm going to increase that. If it's not so great, I'm going to turn it down or cancel it. And having more than one, you always kind of, traditionally, there's this fear out there that it's working good now, but is it going to work good in 6 weeks, right? If you're spending a lot, you'll find that out in 2 weeks. If you're spending a little, purchasing low typical internet lead volume, it might take 6 weeks to realize, hey, our quality's kind of tanked. And this goes back to what we've seen is, kind of the systemic problem behind the scenes. My perspective from this side of the camera is that we've got, lead vendors that for a long time have just done the same thing, and the ad algorithms seem to have changed. This is just my opinion. You get this trend in the data when you're running ads. The lower the income of the person, the easier they are to convert into a lead. So it seems that you tend to get a lot more of those people that just barely need insurance. It doesn't really work. Yeah, single line auto, lapsing coverage. And so because of that, that's I think why a lot of the quality has tanked here. That giveaway is creating your own demand, so the quality is not an issue. It's very consistent. So I will say burnout's a real thing. So in terms of how much time one producer should put in, I would target a minimum of 2 hours a day calling on these leads. The sweet spot's probably 3-4 hours. Some guys are going to start getting burnt out. And simply because even if you're used to, like, my guy makes 200 calls a day, or we've got a power dialer, we do 400 calls a day per producer. When you add up a bunch more talk time, it's a little trickier. I always say it's easy to get cold and robotic when you're making 150 calls a day. We really want to make sure every call is at its best, and that takes a lot of mental energy to stay in tune and on the same page with that person when they answer the phone. And if you're just talking all day long, it can be it's hard work. Your producers are really leveling up their game, and so to maintain that 4 hours a day of calling for a year, there's a point where you get some fatigue. So I'd say 2 to 4 hours is a sweet spot. You can certainly do more. Less doesn't give you as many chances to learn. So, it's you learn a little quicker if you're doing 2 hours a day.
Awesome. And do you have anybody who utilizes like a telemarketer to do the initial outreach, and then if they're interested in a quote, to maybe like multiply their entries or whatever the hook line is, then transfer the person over so that you can basically free up the producer to not be dialing all day, but they're just taking the hot ones that want a quote?
Absolutely. And, we see this actually is fairly common. It's not the most common, but it can absolutely work. There's some nuances to this, right? Again, it comes back to following our process. So we are happy to work with the telemarketer that you've hired, or the virtual assistant team, or the call center, and they can jump into our live trainings, and we'll work with them and teach them. And but what you'll find is with the giveaway, we're overcoming a lot of credibility and trust concerns by doing the giveaway in a very specific way and saying the right things. If you do get somebody in there that's a foreign VA, Philippines, Pakistan, Argentina, Mexico, when there's a little bit of an accent, it can be a point of pause for people, right? A lot of things made sense until, wait a second, what did I click on?
You don't sound
Right?
local. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't sound local. So now, that being said, we have had it work a few times. We've done it dozens of times with foreign entities, and our answer on the whole is it doesn't really work. But if you're in a state where there's lots of Spanish speakers, you have a Spanish-speaking VA, that's a no-brainer, right? They're used to that. So I'd say the biggest question I would ask to yourself and your VAs or your telemarketer is, can they shoot the breeze with somebody in English? Can they shoot the breeze with everybody they talk to, and really just like hit it off, and like we're best friends? If they're the kind of person that's going to be fast friends with somebody in English, then the language barriers can go away pretty quick.
That makes complete sense. That's awesome. Cool. I was more curious than anything, because we see both setups, some with and some without telemarketers. So I was curious.
Stateside works great.
Yeah, hire the in-house person, college intern, whatever that looks like. Yeah, no, that's and that'd be a much more fun telemarketing job for sure, I feel. One of the things that also I'm sure comes up, and I'm playing like devil's advocate, right? I'm dropping in all the skepticism, not because I'm skeptical. I've seen how amazing you guys are, and I know that it works. I'm asking for the agent who's in the audience who's skeptical, right? How do you guys typically respond to the objection, my current lead provider is cheaper per lead, essentially?
Yeah, again, this goes back to pulling out some of those metrics and really looking at what's my cost per acquired customer, but also what's my cost per premium, right? If I have a customer that's bringing in, a single item, like a single line auto, versus customers that are a home with a couple autos, right? It's a 3-to-1 ratio right there. I'd rather have one of these instead of 3 of those that are going to switch really quick when the price changes. So that's one of the biggest things you'll notice here. They're 50 to 70% homeowners, and we can do we give you the option. We can do all homeowners if you like. Usually it's an extra $1.50 a lead to do that. And then the average item counts 3. So it's cheaper per lead. I think part of it comes down to quality. I would say we get the feedback that these are between a cold lead and a referral. So it's a warm lead. They're well qualified. I've had people tell me these leads are kind of like you guys should be charging around $20, $25 for these type of leads. And, we're around $7 a lead traditionally, and it can be a little bit lower if you scale that up.
Cool. And so then the close rate's higher, the premium's higher. Like when people are calculating this, are people getting down into the weeds on like cost of acquisition and actually doing a cost of acquisition comparison at the end and going like, well, yeah, I could buy a lead for $6, but I got to buy a bazillion of them to get the close, and it's going to cost me $600 in leads versus like over here, like maybe our cost of acquisition was like 200. Do you get that deep into the weeds with agents to where they're actually like measuring that number? Because I feel like that's the only one that really matters.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's how we are. We're a little obsessive about results and tracking. So anytime somebody wants to jump in, we can talk numbers. You really don't have a lot to run with until you're into the program, and we can pull up your exact numbers and say, okay, now where are we at? What things do we need to change that we can improve? So one reason this won't work is if you're not able to close new business in your state. Things like that are going to be really key. If you're quoting everybody and you're 3 times more expensive, I wouldn't be buying leads at all, probably. But little things like that are going to impact that. Like, how much premium are we closing per month? Most of our agents are closing, 15 to 75,000 in new premium per month. That it seems to be going up a bit since rates have gone up in the last 2 years. But depending on what type of agency you have, that's a very reasonable range to hit. I know it's a big range, but yeah. So that, absolutely willing to get into the weeds. Cost per acquisition is one thing, but 1 or 2 large clients is better than 10 small ones sometimes.
No, it's a great way to look at that as well. And that's something that even dives a little bit deeper. So you inherently answered the question by going deeper than I did with this. I love that. Now, one of the things that I wanted to like brush shoulders with you on, because I see the longstanding background in sales, right? You've been in multiple industries. Now you guys train producers. You're deep into the sales game, right? And I've also found, for those of you who have only ever sold to consumers, right? Guys like Boyd, who also sell to businesses, they typically carry a different mindset and skill set than somebody that just sells business to consumer. And same thing, if somebody's only ever sold business to business, they might struggle a little bit in business to consumer because they're used to the business relationship. But I think there's so much to be learned from both sides. And I'm curious for you, if you could hardwire just one daily habit into every producer's routine that would accelerate consistent sales growth and ongoing success for them, what would that one daily habit be that every producer could think about adding to their desk? And why does it make such a big difference in your opinion? Just everybody I've talked to like you, who's a pro, an expert, you've got that thing where you're like, I don't know why every producer doesn't just do this one habit every day. And I'm curious for you what that might look like.
Yeah, more time in front of the right person. Now you can get better at selling. That's certainly going to help as well. That's probably the next biggest lever, is your ability to sell and understand the sales process and the customer journey there to get to a close. But if you're spending twice the time, you're going to have twice the results. It's not like you keep everything else the same. So that's one thing. And high level, that's kind of what we looked at, right? Was get rid of some of the wasted time. I don't want to make extra dials. If I get more people to answer right away, you're increasing your sales. So that would be the probably the biggest thing, is just spending more time on the phone. And sometimes there's some contact hesitancy, we all get from time to time. Getting over that hard and fast, you can habit stack and get some things to kick you off in the morning right away to make sure you're diving into the dials. But whether it's, in our case, 50 dials a day, or in others, 100 or 150 dials a day, you got to make the dials too. You can't make sales without talking to people.
100%. I think I've always thought that the game of being a great sales producer in general is you have to be the infantry, you got to be the sergeant, you got to be the general, you got to be your own air support. You got to have ships in the water. And the point being that sometimes you've got to be able to step back from the chessboard and go like, I'm not just a player, I'm inventing the rules to the game. And like, what I'm hearing here is like intentionality, setting your intention early in the day. I need to spend my time, a majority of it, in front of the right customer for as much time as possible. And if that's the intention, that drives everything from how many calls you're willing to make, the nimble sort of strategic mindset you might have throughout the day to go like, I've done this thing for 30 minutes and not connected with a single person that can buy. Maybe I need to pivot and change my strategy or wake up a bit here. But I love that, setting that intention to have more quality conversations with the right customer. And with you working with hundreds, if not probably thousands of sales professionals over the years, what like mindset or mental framework do you see separates them from like the average producers? And if you want, you could even take it to like, if you want, you could take the agency owner world, right? You've worked with thousands of agency owners. Yeah. Like what kind of mindsets are you seeing in the champion agency owners? Because I'm assuming it's one and the same: great agency owner mindset, great producer mindset, and it all trickles downhill from the leader. But what are you seeing when you walk into some of these higher performing books on the way they think about leads and business and growth and all this good stuff?
Yeah, fantastic question. I mean, and you see this too, you kind of alluded to it a bit there, but some resiliency and integrity and following through is always going to make a big difference, right? When a sale doesn't go your way, there's more fish out there in the sea. You're just trying to help the people that are ready for it. Sales is very much a timing thing. And a lot of agency owners were also producers at one point, or in sales in another capacity, or business owners before. And so the sales muscle is never going to go away, but that optimism of like, I just haven't figured it out yet. We recently had an agency come in and they're like, man, the leads seem to be good. We're getting tons of quotes. They're good quotes. We just haven't closed enough of them yet, but that will come. And sure enough, a few weeks later, they just took off. It's about learning that process. So keeping that open mind, like this is different, but technology is changing. The landscape's changing dramatically. We have to learn what are those things that are going to help elevate me to the next level, or at least keep me competitive for another day or two. And so really just keeping that open mindset, always be learning and willing to listen and get better. And so those agencies come in and do really well. The ones that are like, hey, I've got this figured out. I know I'm a pro already. They're kind of a little bit more closed off to new ideas, and they can struggle a little bit at times. So that open mindset, whether you're a producer or an agency owner, is going to have a killer impact on your sales and your ability to grow.
I love that. And I think like you start looking at, a simple, we're going to buy a monoline auto lead for $5. And like, I'm not opposed to that. Right. But when you look at that inherently, it's like, you could technically hire somebody, no insurance experience. They could walk in and day 3, they could pick up the phone and hit the right lead and strike gold. Right. But when you start to look at, that, right, it's like I have somebody new, they don't have a bunch of experience. They don't even know what they're talking about yet they could walk in and stumble across the right lead and they can close a deal. And then there's a lot that they may not close and things like that. But my point to it is that when you look at a method like this, it takes a little bit more sweat equity and investment into your team, getting their mindset right, to learn a new skill set, to dig in, to adopt a creative approach that is not like everybody else and go on the less walk path. But what does that lead to? Well, if you have to train people and they have to level up to play this game, it means the game is more quality. The conversations you're having with people are more quality. The depth of those conversations are more quality. So like when I look at this, it's like you guys force the conversation of like, if you're going to work this strategy, like this is not, if you want to be transactional and you want to just put on a blindfold and say the same 20 like price pitch words over and over 500 times a day, like go for it. You can play the volume game, or we can play the quality game, which leads to, I'm sure, much higher retention, deeper conversations, to your point, more items, probably less people going like, I'm going to go shop around because they weren't shopping in the first place. So then it's just yes or no. And so if anybody's sitting here thinking like, it just seems like so much work. It's like, well, yeah. Like if you want to hit the easy button, you can hit the easy button and you'll be at the mercy of whatever that market's doing. If you want to push the investment button of like, we're going to level up our entire team, all it's going to do is level up your client experience. And that's what I really love about this is like, not being afraid to train the team, not being afraid to get everybody to think bigger and think differently about how to go get, more business. So this has been an awesome conversation. And Boyd, I'd love if you could take off maybe agency owner hat for a second. I'm going to ask you a couple rapid fire questions just from me to you. Like we were sitting at a restaurant and nobody was around. Okay. Number one, what's the single KPI you check first thing when you get in the office every day?
For me, I want to see who am I talking to the first time and who am I following up for the second time, so I can prep for those calls in their own way. So that, knowing that is going to be a great way to make sure I'm prepared for every call.
Beautiful. Love that. So you're looking at people, right? The first thing you look at is people. Who am I talking to next? How about after that? It makes sense, right? Because you're talking about intentionality, having quality conversations with the right people. Go figure that when you walk in, you're like, who am I talking to today? That makes so much sense. And then second rapid fire question, what's the best book or podcast right now on marketing, human-centered marketing that you'd recommend for anybody wanting to do a deep dive into the psychology?
Ooh, there's a lot of good ones. One that an agency owner actually brought up to me the other day that I really liked was an older book from a few years back, Selling with Questions. And I have to go. I ordered it, so it's in the mail. I'll have to go pull the author, but he mentions a few things in there that I think are really powerful. At the end of the day, it's not trying to convince somebody; it's helping them solve their problem. So you got to understand what their perspective is, and the only way to do that is ask and listen, and then see if you can offer something to help. So I've had a few conversations lately. I knew right in the first 5 seconds, there's not going to be a sale here. But I went and sent them, introductions to 5 other agencies that are going to help them with some of the challenges they currently have. Wouldn't have found that out without a question, and they're better off for it, I think.
It's great point. And they always say like questions control conversations. And if you have a good bank of quality questions, you can dig that much deeper with people. So I love that. And there's a book that I would also throw out there that I was thinking about throughout today's conversation called Fanatical Prospecting. Or there's another one. Well, that's by Jeb Blunt. That one's pretty exceptional. But there's this one that's off the beaten path a lot of people don't know about. It's called How to Get a Meeting with Anyone. And it's by a New York Times cartoonist named Stu Heineck. And he's since written 2 follow-up books to it. But How to Get a Meeting with Anyone, I think if you guys like this like breakout mindset, let's think differently about how to approach and go generate business. That book is chock full of the most bizarre yet effective case studies of like some of the wildest outreach campaigns that sales professionals have done over the years. Some really, really cool inspiration. And if your team just read that in the month of June, it was the assignment, everybody read this book. I'm sure that number one, you'd be jumping into something like Giveaway Pad going, perfect. These guys have already had that creative mindset. They already have a solution built for it. And probably a bunch more ideas as well. And that creativity wellspring in your business can really make a huge difference. So between the questions book and between that, I think those would be 2 really good reads for anybody. And if we can, I'll grab you afterwards. Maybe we can find the link to both those. I'll get them out in the chat for anybody in the replay. But the last question that I have, Boyd, really boils down to individuals that were here today or they were watching the rerun. And they're like, no, I'm liking this concept. And look, like if you guys have done giveaways and it hasn't been effective, it is effective. It's how are you going to implement it and how is it being executed? And I think these are the right guys to help you figure out how to make it work. And so if you guys want to get a hold of Giveaway Pad, have a conversation with Boyd, even just, tap into some of the deeper frameworks of this conversation and get to know him better. I would love, Boyd, if you could just share with our audience, like how can people get a hold of you? How can they get in touch with you guys? And we'll make sure to drop any links or anything that you direct us to in the chat as well for the audience.
Yeah, love to chat and see if this is what you guys might be looking for. There's a lot of lead sources out there, and this is definitely a little different. So if you want more details, the giveawaypad.com right here on the screen is a great way to get more information on us. And then we've got some, we have a small YouTube channel we're starting to put together with some testimonials. You can learn a little bit more, but our application to work with us and book a call with me is here on giveawaypad.com.
Awesome. And I'll drop that out in the chat. It's giveawaypad.com. And then if anybody reaches out to me and wants to get personal touch with Boyd or anybody on their team, feel free to email me at andy@teamhired.com, and I'm happy to redirect anybody back your way as well. But Boyd, this has been awesome. I really, really appreciate you guys for what you do every day, because I know it's easy to jump in line and just do the same thing as everybody else, but it takes bravery and courage. And it also takes success and data to back this up. So the very fact that you guys exist and you're as successful as you are working with that many agencies just shows that this is highly effective. And I think like there's a lot of organizations out there who half bake a solution, right? You guys don't. Yes, you have the giveaway framework. Yes, you have the ad strategy, but beneath that, you've got the training, you've got the scripting, you've got the processes, you've got the dial counts, you've got the mediums, and you've got the whole system. And I think that's like, if you guys are looking for good solutions out there, you need to find companies like Giveaway Pad that don't just give you something that's one piece to the puzzle, but they unlock the entire grid work and say, we're going to bring in a system that's actually going to work within your business. And that's what you guys have done. So this has been awesome, Boyd, and I really, really appreciate you guys being here. We'll have to have you back on at some point as well. And for our audience, thank you again for joining us for another weekly episode of Ask the Experts. And we will be with you next week, Thursday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern. And you guys have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you.